and welcome to How to Love Successfully. This is a podcast for female leaders who are looking for that loving connection and making their love life as much of a success as their careers have been. Here we talk about dating successfully and creating a loving relationship. I am your host, Dr. Kovanen. I'm a registered psychologist and a conscious dating coach. For the past 15 years, I have been working with individuals and couples and help them with their relationships. I share from my personal experiences of dating. I share my observations from working with clients about what makes relationships successful and how to find the right person for you. I would love to invite you to follow this podcast to get notified of the new episodes and join my email list. You will find the link in the show notes to get dating tips and notifications of any new materials. But now let's go into this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Love Successfully with me, Dr. Kovanen, and I'm a registered psychologist and a conscious dating coach. And today I have another wonderful guest here with me. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest. So my guest is Sophie Gwinnett, and she's a clinical psychologist. And welcome, Sophie. Thank you so much for coming here today. And let me tell you a little bit about her. So Sophie is a clinical psychologist, TEDx Speaker, and director of Brightside Psychology. Over her 20-year career, she has worked with individuals, couples, and families to heal relational trauma and build healthy, secure connections. More recently, she has applied her professional and some personal knowledge to the area of dating, sharing her ideas in her 2022 TEDx talk, Breaking Free: 3 Steps for a Better Romantic Future. Sophie is passionate about all things attachment related and helping people not only survive, but to thrive in their relationships. Oh my goodness, I'm so looking forward to this conversation with you, because as we had a bit of a conversation just before starting, that we share this love for attachment. And this is perhaps one of the most important things to talk about when it comes to dating and finding the right relationship, and then even building a relationship. So could you tell me a little bit about how did you get interested in this area, in attachment and relationship, and what's really driven that for you?
Okay. Hi, Mari. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm very passionate about attachment theory and relationships. So it's great to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you. So my interest in attachment theory started over 20 years ago. I've been working in clinical psychology services for 22 years now. Mm-hmm. And I started my career as an assistant psychologist and then a trainee working in something called Sure Start centres. I'm not sure if they're still around, and a lot of them did go. They were fabulous because what they were these community hubs that we were designed to wrap around parents right from the start of pregnancy through to the point at which their child started school. And they had multidisciplinary teams, so psychologists, midwives, house visitors, dietitians. And the idea was we were supporting new parents to build healthy, secure connections with their children and really give those kids the best start in life. So that's where my interest in attachment theory started, and using attachment models clinically. And it gave me a really good grounding, I think, in attachment. And then as I went through my career, I worked in several different services when I was training and shortly after training. And then in my NHS career, I settled for many years working in a hospital with people with physical health problems. Mm-hmm. And I would often find myself working with people with very serious clinical diagnoses or at the end of their lives. And what I found is that attachment theory is relevant at every life stage. because ultimately it's about the quality of the relationships that we have. And people who have good quality, secure relationships, and the research supports this, do tend to fare better physically and emotionally. I've also got my own practice now where I work with individuals and couples. I work with a wide range of presenting difficulties, but I've not lost that interest in attachment. And something I will always explore with my clients is the quality of their relationships, because I think it does have a big impact on how people show up in life, how they cope with difficulties, and how they tend to fare in the long term.
Absolutely. So if anyone, obviously attachment is thrown about a little bit now on social media, but if you are someone who doesn't really know much about it, so could you about in a kind of snapshot, when we talk about attachment, what are we talking really here?
So attachment is really about the bonds that we form. So we're born into the world wired to connect with others. It's a survival response. We are social beings, aren't we? And we're biologically predisposed, if you like, to form safe and secure attachments with others. And obviously in infancy and early childhood, our main attachment figure is our primary caregiver, usually a parent. Okay? Now, if the caregiving that we receive early in childhood is consistent, is reliable, is responsive, is attuned, that infant will learn very early on that relationships are a source of comfort, they're a source of safety, that they can depend on others, and it's safe to express their needs because they know that those needs are likely to be met. Now, if a child has a different experience of being cared for, and there's lots of reasons why this can happen, it's never about parent blaming, but being realistic about how hard it can be sometimes to give that consistent and responsive caregiving. But if the child isn't able to access that, then what they will generally do is adapt to that relationship. They will adjust their behaviour so that they can still, to the best of their ability, survive and thrive within that family system. So they will learn what needs are safe to express and what they might need to suppress. And what we often see, if I talk about the two main insecure attachment styles, we will typically see, I know there is a third, but I don't know that we want to go into that today, but what we will typically see is these children will form either an anxious, or sometimes it's called ambivalent attachment style, or an avoidant, dismissive attachment style. So in the anxious, ambivalent attachment style, we will typically see more behaviours that are designed to draw their caregiver close. It's almost this sort of, don't forget about me, please don't overlook me, I need to make sure that you continue to be me and meet my needs as much as possible. And then in the avoidant attachment style, there are more behaviours that are designed to keep some distance from the caregiver, because that feels safer. That's the child's best adaptation. Now, what happens in childhood, as we know, doesn't stay in childhood, does it? It can get wired into our nervous system.
Absolutely.
And these adaptations can become patterns that sort of follow us through life. And I think it's important to say with attachment as well that it's not necessarily stable, that other significant relationships and in adulthood, relationships with partners can change our attachment style.
Absolutely. I think there's so much misinformation and blame and shame and some, if you read about attachment online. Written by people who are not clinicians, and they just go by taking bits, and then I guess it makes quite good posts and things like that, and which are quite not nice and might leave someone feeling quite bad about themselves if they find themselves under particular label or something like that.
Absolutely. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure you've found this too, as somebody who has a really strong interest in attachment, how it's taken off in the general public. Over recent years. And you go on TikTok, on Instagram, there is so much out there about attachment, but a lot of it is used in a very pathologizing way, isn't it? There's something wrong with you if you have an insecure attachment style, around 50% of the population do have an insecure attachment style. And actually, I think that recognizing that your attachment style is how you adapted to your early relationships or to your relationships. They were survival mechanisms.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
It's how you learn to survive and thrive in life.
And it doesn't mean that if you have particular difficulties right now, that you can't overcome them, or that in relationship, like you said, that in a secure relationship or in the relationship, you can learn certain skills, but you can also do other work to help yourself and so on. So it's not fixed by any means or anything like that. So just
absolutely. And I'm a firm believer that the very best place to heal old attachment wounds is in a loving relationship.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then going into, you said that in the intro even that there was this professional interest and then you had a little bit of a personal interest. So could you tell a little bit about this personal interest?
Lay it all out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of my own relationship history, I got married in my 20s. So I met my ex-husband when I was still quite young, and we married quite young. We had our 3 wonderful boys who are now teenagers and young adults. And I think in our 20s, it worked well, but we did come from very different family backgrounds, and our families had very different values. And whilst I think in our 20s, values weren't really felt or seen too much, I think when we got into our early 30s, we'd become parents. We both had very different careers that we were both very committed to as well. I think those different values started to show up more. We separated when I was in my early 30s, and that's when I had my first experience of online dating. Wow, what an eye-opener. And back then, because I had a young family in my household, I was a single mom. What I will say is that my ex-husband is an absolutely brilliant co-parent, and we've always been able to maintain a great co-parenting relationship, and that's been really important to me. But in my household, I was a single mom and starting to explore the dating scene. But the time that I could commit to dating was very limited. So I did date. I went on some really great first dates. I went on a few great second dates. I actually really enjoyed the experience at the time. And I don't know if that was in part because I wasn't fully committed to it. It was a kind of, I've got a Saturday night free without the kids. Why don't I try going on a date?
Yes. Exploring the world a little bit after a long-term relationship. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I did meet somebody who I then got into a relationship with. And we had some very different values. So we really connected in terms of the values of humour and fun. We had lots of fun together. We had a great time together. But in terms of level of commitment, in terms of future plans, in terms of how we wanted to work a relationship around our children, because we each had 3 children, we really found it hard to align. And we ended up in this on-off relationship, which went on for the best part of a decade. Something happened as well very early on in that relationship to me. So I had some really serious health problems for a period of time. So I had treatment for quite an aggressive form of cancer. And that was about 2 years after meeting this person. Through something like that and it not change you fundamentally, which it did. And I'm, very pleased to say that the treatment was successful and I overcame the cancer. But I think what started to happen was I started to change what I wanted from a relationship. Now, anybody who's been through an experience like that or has been through cancer will know that it doesn't go away the day that the treatment finishes. No. You have these years afterwards of waiting and wondering, is it going to come back? If it does, how will I cope? What will that be like? And I think what happened was I started to need more from a relationship than that relationship could give me. I'd started to crave a level of support and security and consistency and reliability that this relationship just wasn't designed for. So after, like I said, a number of years of on, off, we did separate. And by this time I was in my early 40s. And this is when I hit the dating scene for the second time in my life.
Yes.
But before I did, I'd already had some therapy and I continued to engage in therapy. And because I was doing a lot of this work with my own clients, exploring relationship patterns, thinking about their attachment styles, I decided I was going to do this myself. And I really felt that the best place for me to do that was in therapy. I explored my past relationship patterns. I recognized that there is perhaps a bit of an avoidant part to me, and that perhaps I was seeking out relationships with people who did have different values to me, because that meant that there was going to be this safe distance. And actually, when I looked back at my main relationships, one of the triggers for me to feel quite anxious in a relationship is that feeling that it's too close. Now, if I tell you a bit about my childhood, I do come from a very loving family. I'm very fortunate, but it was also a very busy family. So I was the youngest of three girls. And in my first 7 years of life, my parents also fostered teenagers. So you can imagine this busy household. And my parents also worked really hard. My dad was a really busy music teacher. My mum worked in higher education and she did a degree and a PhD. You know, it's going on. And we learned to be quite independent. Yes. We learned to be quite self-sufficient. But also, I would say both my parents had strong feminist values. And raising three girls, they wanted us to know that we could show up in the world and belong in the world, despite the patriarchy. We didn't need to rely on a guy to do that. So there were these kind of values that were instilled in me around being independent, doing things for myself. And that can, as we know in adult relationships, sometimes be a bit of a blessing and sometimes be a bit of a curse, right?
Absolutely. And especially the audience here. This podcast is aimed at successful women, driven, high-achieving female leaders.
Yes.
And I find that this is often the way. You've grown up to be quite independent and you've grown up to be someone who does things, focus, all of that kind of stuff, and not needing or at least having to suppress maybe those parts that would need others.
Absolutely.
And maybe there's a bit of shame in that too. So then going into dating, I wonder how that was for you now, reflecting back when you were dating from that position. Independent and...
Yeah, and dating and being in a relationship where I felt like I had to fight to retain a level of independence and self-sufficiency. And I think what was really helpful in my therapy was exploring that actually it's okay to open up to a relationship. It's okay to need. It's okay to have wants and to have needs. Yeah. It's okay to crave connection. Absolutely. And that's not a weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had my second experience of dating. I had a bit of a false start. So I dated somebody for a few months and then recognised, hang on a moment, we've got different values here. One of my patterns is I can shapeshift in a relationship. So I become a version of me that I think is acceptable to the other person, which I think is very common.
It's very common in women, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I began to recognise that pattern occurring again. So I knew now I was like armed and I was equipped with this knowledge of my past patterns and what I didn't want to repeat again. And so I came out of that, and very soon afterwards, I met my now partner. And yeah, we've got a wonderful relationship. He's definitely got a very secure attachment. So he's great for me.
Yeah.
But we share a lot of the same values. We have a lot of the same interests as well as some separate interests. But we also share the same values in terms of the relationship and where we want it to go and what we want to get from the relationship. And that's very important for me.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
And with this knowledge, and I always recommend to everyone to do self-exploration, whether it's in some form of therapy, coaching, or whatever, or even reading books and understanding yourself before you go into, or even whilst you are dating. But the more you understand about yourself, the better, really.
Absolutely.
And like you said, that the differences in values you came to realize in your first marriage and then this second long-term relationship. and then now you found a place where your values are aligned. And how different is it then from those previous relationships? How does it feel to be in that relationship when the values align and things are, you start from a completely different place, I could imagine?
Yeah, it feels completely different. I vividly remember driving home from our fourth date and feeling this overwhelming sense of relief.
Oh.
That's all I can describe it as. It was the sense of it is out there and I have found it. This sense of safety that I've craved, this relationship where we align and I think it is the first time that I've had that. And what I'm able to do in this relationship is show up authentically.
Yes.
I can be 100% myself. I can bring every part of me into the relationship and they're all loved and they're all accepted. I don't have to shapeshift. I don't have to pretend to be somebody else. And something really liberating about that, I think.
Because deep down, all of us, we just crave to be accepted as people we are fully.
Yeah.
But like for so many people, we just end up in relationships. And in the beginning, and especially if you meet someone in 20s, even 30s, it depends on how much, maybe there's a lot more stuff around self-awareness, even for people in their 20s these days. So maybe it's not quite, I remember being in my 20s, completely oblivious to all of this. And then it was only after a few knockbacks and what have you, start to question, well, maybe there's something going on here.
Yeah.
That's brilliant that things have really changed. But how important those values really are.
They really are. Yeah. And I think, and like you said, being able to do the work as well. So being able to reflect on your past patterns, being able to reflect on, well, what is it that I'm drawn towards? So why is that? I did a lot of hard work, and sometimes I joke with my partner that he's my prize. My prize for doing the hard work in therapy.
Absolutely, because you up level the kind of standard of your relationships. When you do work, then you expect more. You know yourself. You expect more in terms of the quality of the relationship. You expect more when you do that kind of work.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, and we're so much more in tune with our own needs, aren't we? So we don't go blindly into dating or into relationships. We're much better at saying, this is what I need from a partnership, from a relationship.
Absolutely. And those conversations early on are so important. But I don't think many people do those, or there's often, maybe it's more of a female thing. Men may not have previously, especially, have had the vocabulary to say these kind of things. And then maybe for women, it's about fear of that, like you were saying, that you're trying to be someone that the person likes, instead of saying, actually, this is the person who I am. And this is what I want in a relationship, and what kind of relationship I want to have in the future. And then whether it works with that person or not, that's a different matter. Because if we are expecting the other either meet our needs completely, or that we need to be what the other person wants, then we lose ourselves. And
we do. And I think we build up resentment over time as well, don't we? If we're able to bring all parts of ourselves to the relationship, those hidden parts, they become quite resentful, don't they? Absolutely. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. And especially if someone doesn't start the relationship with aligned values or being authentically themselves, and they are being someone who they're not, then there comes a point where the truth comes out in some ways. And then it's just like, but you were this, but now you're that. What's going on?
Yeah, and it usually comes out in conflict, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Have you got a dating dilemma? Are you wondering what is stopping you from finding love? If you haven't heard yet, I have free 30-minute dating clinic consultations available every month. And during these meetings, I will ask you specific questions to help you to figure out what is stopping you from finding love. You will leave with clarity and a plan how to move forward in finding love for you. You can find the details in the show notes, and I would love to see you there. Let's go now back to the episode. how can someone start doing this work of understanding the patterns and their values and all of that? Where do you even start with that kind of work?
So in my TEDx talk, I laid it out in 3 steps, which I felt might make sense to people. So the first step is about exploring your past relationship patterns. So before you go into dating or whilst you're dating, taking the time either in therapy, or through talking to friends, siblings, but being able to explore what your patterns are. And this is about really getting curious about yourself. Because I think we're very good, aren't we, when we're looking at our past relationship, at being able to talk about the other person.
Yes.
You know, they were this, they were that, they didn't show up enough, or they showed up too much. But what we're really looking for here is what patterns do we have? Who are we drawn towards? And when we are in relationship, how do we tend to show up? And how do we behave when we're anxious? And what triggers us? Because we are the only common factor in all of our past relationships, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's about really being able to dig deep and understand ourselves in relationship and in dating. And you can even go back a bit further and ask yourself, where do these patterns come from? What were my early experiences of relationship? And I would, to anybody, recommend doing this in therapy if that's an option for you, to seek a therapist who has quite a good grounding in attachment theory and can help you to unpick some of this stuff.
Absolutely.
And when you're exploring your past patterns, what you might find is that you're able to pick and value certain things that you recognize are really important to you. You're really looking at, when do I feel most safe in a relationship, and what are the factors that contribute to that? But also, what makes me anxious? What makes me want to withdraw from a relationship, or what makes me want so that I've got to fight for it? And if you're able to journal this out, then all the better, because you've got it written down. It's something you'll keep coming back to. So that's the first step that I talk about then. It's about being able to explore our past patterns. And then from that, which is the second step, is about identifying our relationship value. These are the principles and the qualities that guide how we tend to conduct ourselves in relationships and in dating. Okay? So they really do form the foundation for how we treat ourselves and how we treat others and how we show up. Some common relationship values might be trust, honesty, reliability, independence, dependence, humour, equality. But if you've done the work in the initial step of exploring your past patterns, then it does make this second step a bit easier, because you'll already have quite a lot of that information there. Okay. And I think sometimes when I'm doing this work with clients, they can get a little bit confused about values and mix them up with how they think they ought to behave in a relationship, or what might make them more appealing to somebody else. But these values are really about you as an individual. What are those qualities? What are those principles that matter most to you, that enable you to flourish in a relationship and feel safe? Now, one of the ways that I do this in therapy with clients is I have something called a values card. So we've got about 100 cards with different values on them. And if you wanted to do something like this at home, there are lists of values that you can download from the internet. And I will ask clients to divide them into 3 piles. So we've got not important to me and very important to me. And what we'll typically find is when they've sorted these values into 3 piles, is that there's loads in the very important to me pile. But then comes the tricky step to pick out their 8 most important values. And it's not to say that the others aren't important. We know that all the others are still important. But picking out your 8 most important values when it comes to relationships is a really useful exercise to do. And you can do that at home. You don't have to do that in therapy.
Absolutely. Having clarity on what's really important, because then that gives you already a bit of direction. Where do I want to go in my next relationship? Instead of, I have no idea. I have vague idea, but it's the clarity is really important. And having it there in front of you Yeah, I always say to clients often that you have to write these things that you're looking for down, because if it's just in your head, you go on the date, you'll forget it, you'll get this hormonal rush and you're just like, I'll go with the gut feeling instead of you actually need to go back and, okay, especially you've had a tendency to jump into things maybe typically, is to go back and then assess against your list. So that you've got it's becoming a research. That sort of bit more detached way of approaching this assessment phase almost.
Absolutely. Because if you look back at your past relationships that haven't worked out, what you'll find is there was misalignment in some of these key values. That you wanted one thing and they wanted another. And that's what we will typically see in relationships that don't work out. But then the opposite is true. If you allow these values to guide you and to inform the decisions that you make with dating and relationships, then you're really setting yourself up to have a successful, compatible relationship.
Absolutely. And those are so important to be like the guiding light for you instead of maybe some external qualities or what have you. Because when you go with what your heart really needs, it leads to connection. But if you go with what you think you should be wanting or something like that's not leads you to a healthy, sort of healthy relationship.
Yeah. And beware of high chemistry.
Yes.
In the early stages.
Yes. It's a toxic cocktail.
But that's because often what we're drawn towards is what's familiar to us over what is helpful for us. So if we didn't have a great experience of being cared for when we were young, we're more likely to be drawn towards relationships that repeat some of those patterns, right? Because our brain likes the familiar. It is drawn towards the familiar, but we can override that. When we've got the knowledge, when we've got the insight into those patterns, we can recognize them when they're starting to show up and we can say, I know what that chemistry is about. That's because it's familiar.
Yes.
But that isn't what's necessarily good for me.
Absolutely. And because sometimes women may say, oh, why do I keep going for this guy who's maybe quite distant or what have you, comes and goes and what have you. And then say, oh, but they're so good looking or they're quite attractive. So being distracted by a lot of stuff. Whereas then if you go back to and look at the values, and assess from that point and say, oh, okay, the value it doesn't match because if I want a loving, consistent relationship, their behavior is not demonstrating any of that. So you can use your more rational brain then instead of just those hormonal responses to guide you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really nice to have those something to guide you, isn't it? Because dating can be overwhelming. Absolutely. It can feel very uncertain. Yeah, but when we've got these values that allow us to inform how we show up, inform our decisions, I can make the whole process feel a bit safer.
Absolutely. Because there is that guiding light, really. Where do I want to go? It is where I feel safe and really comfortable in that place instead of just going on dates on people where straight away that is not the right match in any way at all. And I think we need to start the selection process quite early on. So because many times, I don't know where I do remember someone saying that actually some of the even dating apps, which obviously they get their money from people staying there, but some of the dating apps advise that just go out on as many dates as possible. But you completely burn yourself out. And then if you haven't got anything to guide you, so even the selection process, it becomes easier when you have those values you go by and you don't need to go on dates with everyone because if already early on their behavior showing that there's misalignment, then you don't waste your time on that person.
Absolutely. Yeah, it allows you to be more selective, doesn't it, in terms of who you invest time in. Yeah.
So is there part 3?
We didn't cover part 3. No, we can come back to it. Yeah. So the third step that I talk about in my TEDx talk is about committing to act on your values.
Yes.
Now, I think it's Esther Perel who just has that lovely phrase, love is a verb. And I think it's really helpful to view love as an action rather than a feeling. Leverage what we do. We're not passive bystanders when it comes to love and relationships. We really need to show up and act in ways that are going to give us our best chance of finding successful love, right?
Absolutely.
So this is about how do we create dating experiences that are aligned with our values. And when we do meet somebody, how do we co-create a really healthy relationship with them? This is all about the kind of the action phase, the doing phase, the behavior phase, which was where we were going when we were talking about being selective with who we date and how we show up. And it's about being really conscious and intentional with our behavior. Because if we leave things to automatic pilot, we're much more likely to repeat those old and unhelpful patterns. Yeah. So I think, again, just allowing those values to guide us, to guide who we choose to go on a date with, how we show up on that date, whether we choose to see them again, the types of dates that we go on, they can all be informed by these values.
So that's really is so important. And I think this has been a really helpful conversation to have because there are so many women. Wherever you read about someone or someone says that they're dating, they literally just launch into it. And very few people who actually do this work. And it is so important. And even your own story shows really how important it is and what happened. Like you said, was there then.
I'm not sure how it feels about being called my prize, but there we go. That's what it feels like sometimes.
Maybe it's the relationship, the quality of the relationship is
the quality of the relationship. Yeah, for sure. And I did have these two very different experiences of dating adulthood. The first experience when I came out of my marriage, when I was in my early 30s, and then that second experience in my 30s, coming back into it again, but so much better informed the second time around.
It has been such a wonderful conversation. What would be the best way to connect with you if someone wanted to know more about your work, and what's the best way to connect with you?
Sure. Okay. So I would suggest watching my TED Talk.
Yes.
That's Breaking Free, 3 Steps to a Better Romantic Future. You can Google me. I'm the director of Right Side Psychology. If you want to work with me, you can look me up at www.rightsidepsychology.com. I'm not a huge social media person, as I think Mari, but I'm trying to get better. And I'm on Instagram at Dr. Sophie Gwinnett, and I'm on Facebook, which is Right Side Psychology, and you can follow me on both of those.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. And
thank you for having me.
Check out that TED Talk. I think it's important to sometimes hear these conversations more than once, because it always lands differently. First time you hear it, and then hearing it all over and so on. So thank you so much for this conversation. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed talking to you today.
If you learned something new, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. That way other women like you can hear about this and learn, and also build a beautiful relationship with them. And please remember, give yourself the love you want first, and then you will attract the right person and the right relationship.